My name is Kip Banks Sr. I serve as the senior pastor of the East Washington Heights Baptist Church, located in Southeast Washington, D.C.
So tell me a little bit about your background, where you were born and raised, and tell me a little bit about your family and how you came into the Christian ministry.
I am a native of Los Angeles, California, born and raised in Los Angeles, and I went to undergraduate school at the University of California at Santa Cruz. And I come from a family of preachers. My great-grandfather was a Baptist preacher in Louisiana, and in Arkansas, my grandfather was a pastor of a church in Texas for over 53 years. And so coming from a family of preachers, the last thing that I wanted to do was to be a preacher. However, when I got to undergraduate school at UC Santa Cruz and was only one of 4 black men in my class, I began to ask questions why. Why weren't there more African Americans in college? And I became very passionate about doing what I could do to make the world a better place for African Americans and all of the underprivileged persons in our society. And so I decided to go to graduate school to pursue a master's degree in public policy. So I went to the University of Michigan, and while I was pursuing the master's degree in public policy, God showed me you can change all the policies that you want, but there's a larger spiritual battle, and the church has a key role to play in that. And so God called me into the ministry to work to make the church an effective agent of change, of trying to bring the gospel, not only the gospel, but also policies that effectuate change to all of its children.
Okay. That is phenomenal. Just a reminder, look only at this one, but that was
Okay.
what a powerful answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, but he already hit that one that we were going to ask next. Yeah, so that's good.
Talk a little bit about East Washington Heights Baptist Church. Tell us about your membership. What makes this church special and unique? What do you love about this church? Yeah.
What I love about the East Washington Heights Baptist Church is that we truly are a community church. Our church is located about 3 miles east of the Capitol. We're the oldest church in this neighborhood, but we've also been engaged with the community. We have an active food pantry ministry where we feed over 150 persons, families. We have an active clothes closet. We have an active street ministry, and our membership is primarily comprised of persons that live in the neighborhood. Our congregation is 90% African American, but the neighborhood is changing, and so as the neighborhood has changed, so has the racial composition of our church. I actually am the first African American pastor of this church, and so when I came, the church was probably about 85% African American, but as the neighborhood has changed, so has the dynamics of our membership. But our goal is to truly be a neighborhood church, and so our goal is to serve all the members of the East Washington neighborhood.
You're the first African. That's fascinating. So it was a black church, but there was not.
It wasn't a black church.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it was not a black church.
This is the last census tract in all of D.C. to desegregate.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
So how did that all come about? Like, I mean, what was that transition like?
Well, that's what I love about this church and this neighborhood. The church has played a key role in working to desegregate the neighborhood. They preach to their members that loving your neighbor included loving those of different race. And so the church is integrated first. And then once the church is integrated, then the neighborhood's integrated. And so going back to the 60s, in this neighborhood, you had blacks and whites living next to one another. And so, and this was fostered by this church in conjunction with, across the street, there's a Lutheran church, and there's an Episcopalian church. All the churches came together to preach from their pulpits that love includes loving those of other races. And so as of such, we've had this wonderful spirit of love and harmony across races in this church and in the community for over 50 years.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to shift gears and get into, like, you know, the whole reason why we're here. Why do you think the Christian church should pay attention to teen pregnancy and unplanned pregnancy?
I think that the church should pay attention to unplanned pregnancy and teen pregnancy because the church has a mandate to minister to the totality of needs of those in our community. And in particular, today, we see teen pregnancy and unwed pregnancy being a factor that leads to poverty, that leads to criminalization. And so the family is so important, and children are important. And so it's critical that we do all that we can do to make certain that children come into the world under the best of circumstances.
Reverend Banks, if I could ask, tell us a little bit about your perception of the black family over time, particularly even in this neighborhood. What have you seen in terms of the ebbs and flows and the dynamics that you've seen both in this church and in this community?
The black family has changed. In terms of the black family, first even talk about marriage, and marriage rates have gone down. And today we have a situation where 70% of African American children are born out of wedlock. And so we've seen a shift where we've come to accept this fact, and we also see more grandparents getting involved in terms of raising their grandchildren, because many of the young people who are having children, they're unable to sustain them. And so we see a major engagement of grandparents, those who are retired, now raising children.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Because I think that grandparent piece is important. Grandparents provide so much strength and support. Is it also the case, but could it also be the case that because they're from an older generation, they may be a little bit more hesitant to talk about issues of teen pregnancy and sex and so forth? How do you think it's possible that the grandparent-caregiver dynamic could affect teen pregnancy?
Yes, certainly having this new generation of young children being raised by grandparents has positives because they bring them to church. And we find, for example, we had our Children's Sunday last Sunday. We have over 25 children in our children's ministry, and it's because many of the grandparents bring their children to the children's ministry. So it's positive in that these grandparents are transferring their conservative values to the young people, but they are hesitant to talk about issues like teen pregnancy. And the reality is nowadays children are far more advanced in terms of learning about sex and sexuality, and so it's critical that the church play a role of engaging these grandparents and engaging the children in terms of their outcomes as it relates to sex and pregnancy.
So why do you think it's, I mean, I guess I know you said they're conservative values of the grandparents, but why do you think other reasons are people aren't having this conversation within the church?
Well, it's taboo. Unfortunately for the church, sex is a taboo topic, and it just goes with the tradition. Certain things you don't discuss in church. However, it's everywhere in society. I mean, you can't watch Good Morning America without there being a conversation about sex or how people look. You can't watch soap operas without there being conversations about sex. And so it's critical for the church to engage these issues head on. And as a pastor, I seek to engage these issues. This Sunday is Father's Day, and I'm preaching a sermon on the problem with pornography, to talk about it head on. And I mean, today, what we watch at the family hour would have been considered pornography 40 or 50 years ago. And we have to address these issues head on as a church. It's critical.
Reverend Banks, when you take steps like preaching a sermon on the dangers of pornography or engaging in other tough issues, do you find that the congregation is okay and that they welcome that moral courage? I'm asking that because I think it's important for other pastors to hear that you can engage some of these things and everything will be okay. But
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, certainly as a pastor, I believe that it is my role to force the congregation or to put these cutting-edge issues before them and to have them look at them in a different way. And I found in my experience that when we address these issues head on, that the congregation is welcoming of the dialogue and of the conversation. I've been serving as pastor here for 14 years. When I first came to the church, we did a series with our young people called Keeping It Real, discussions about sexuality. And so we had a very frank discussions about sex and sexuality with our teens. And the congregation welcomed that conversation. Because the other reality is, if we don't talk about it, young people are still engaged in sexual activity. And so we can't put our heads in the sand. We have to address the issues head on.
That's awesome. Wow, I didn't know about that program.
Yeah. I mean, so how do you start that change? Because I mean, a lot of people are going to be, they're going to be sort of rejecting it at first. But how do you consistently get that dialogue going and make it so we understand it's not a comfortable subject, but it's a necessary subject to talk about? So how do we go about making that change and make it consistent?
Well, certainly you begin to change locally. One of the most important things as well is for a dialogue to occur at the denominational levels, to have various leaders who influence other pastors to address the importance of these topics. The bottom line is that we are not preparing our young people for success, and if we continue down the path of high teenage pregnancies, we're going to have too many of our children are going to be poor. They're not going to receive adequate education, and so a lot is at stake. And so we must communicate to our pastors to educate them about the significance of this in terms of long-term implications for the well-being of the overall community. And so one of the ways as well that we can get the word out is by working with our denominations. I'm a member of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which is the convention of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so it's critically important for PNBC, as we call it, to be engaging its pastors, to tell them of the importance of dialoguing about teen pregnancy and the consequences of teen pregnancy down the road.
So what is the experience of teenage girls and boys in churches that ignore these topics, and how do you think they feel about it?
The consequences for teenage boys and girls that ignore these topics are that they tend to go away from the church. The church loses out because the church does not benefit from their energy and from their input. And this is a major issue that I feel very passionate about, and that is the need to have an intergenerational church, because we have an intergenerational church. The old learn from the young, and the young learn from the old, and it all need to be together. But when we fail to address these topics, what happens is that we have a division in the church, which is not healthy for the church, and it's also not healthy for the community.
Kristen, if you ever feel like you want to expound on anything, just jump in. I mean, obviously, you have some insight, so we definitely want to hear it.
Okay.
Yeah. So what program do you think is needed to address teen and unplanned pregnancy in the church?
And you can also talk about the importance of dialogue, like the keeping it real dialogue, too. Because I think a lot of churches aren't doing that.
Right.
Right. Well, there needs to be, in terms of programming, the church.
And I'm sorry, hold on one second. Do we need to turn down the air? What do you?
Nah, his mic is pretty tight,
Okay.
so
All right.
yeah,
You can cut it off if you want.
turn it. The fan. Can you turn the fans down just a little bit?
You can just cut it off for a bit.
Which one is it?
Right. Yeah.
This one.
The last one, the lowest one. Yeah.
Yeah, just in case. Yeah. Maybe a little one, but.
All right. Yeah. So go ahead. Tell us about Keeping It Real program, and what other programs and steps do you think can go along with a program that you need to help address these issues.
In terms of addressing the issue of teen and unplanned pregnancy, I found that it's very useful if churches directly address the issue through their programming. When I first became pastor of the East Washington Heights Baptist Church 14 years ago, there was a program that we employed called Keeping It Real, discussions about sexuality. And the purpose of those discussions were to discuss issues around body image and just the realities of sex. Too often churches are in the Victorian era not willing to discuss sex issues openly. And what I found is that it's important just to have church elders, church ministers, deacons who are willing to just dialogue with young people, and not from a standpoint of shame or guilt, but just allowing young people to ask questions without being judged. And so creating an atmosphere where young people feel free to come to the church with these issues. Now, interestingly enough, we had these courses with a number of our teens, and the very teens who engaged in these dialogues, although none of them became pregnant as teenagers, most of them still became single parents. And so, in retrospect, I think that those conversations were very effective. But certainly, we need more. We need more of them. We need more dialogue. We need to embrace our teens and to begin the dialogue with them at the local church level, but also at the national level as well.
Reverend Banks, how important is it to address not just women and girls, but boys in conversations about sex and pregnancy and responsibility and so forth?
It's very critical to address not only teenage girls, but also teenage boys, because certainly the society sends mixed messages about what it means to be a man, and that to be a man, to be a strong man, means that you have a lot of girls, that you have a lot of sex. And quite to the contrary, that's the furthest thing from the truth from a biblical standpoint. And so, because we're now living in this age where sexual bravado is encouraged, as the church, it is critical that we work with our young men to teach them about fidelity, and also that true love waits, in particular as well. That intimacy is much more important than sex in terms of treating women as objects, but instead seeking to have a relationship of love, and that true love waits.
Okay. Wonderful.
So if somebody comes to you and says, Reverend Banks, in that instance, hey, I got my girlfriend pregnant, or I'm pregnant, the girl comes to you and says that, what's been your experience in a situation like that? How would you respond?
Or how do you think other pastors should respond?
Yeah.
Well, the first response should be a response of love, and a response of understanding, and a response of prayer. And so judgment, I mean, there shouldn't be a rush to judgment, but there should be an embracing of that young person, because certainly a young person needs support during the time of pregnancy. As a church, when a young person is pregnant, certainly we reach out to them. We've changed because we find more so now that more of our young people are getting pregnant without being married.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then I guess as we come to our conclusion, could you just kind of speak to pastors around the country and say, and let them know that they don't have to have all of the answers to start this conversation? In order that you may not have all the answers, that this church may not have all the answers, but it's important to participate in this dialogue. If you wouldn't mind just sharing a message with pastors around the country.
Yeah. Well, certainly the Bible tells us to suffer the little children and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God. And clearly, our future, the future of our nation, rests with the well-being of our children and our young people. And at the rate we're going now, with 70% of young African-American children being born out of wedlock, there's a high correlation of poverty. There's a high correlation of those individuals born in those circumstances not doing well in society. It isn't to say that it can't happen, but we certainly always want to put our best foot forward. And so it's critical for us as pastors to do all that we can do to engage our young people in dialogue, to encourage them, and to let them know that God has a bright future for them, plans to prosper them and not to harm them, to give them a hope and a future, and that indeed that true love waits. What they're looking for, our young people today are looking for, they're looking for a relationship. And it's very, certainly the smartphones, technology is good, but at the same time, this technology leads to isolation. And so as a church, we must seek to build community. And part of building that community is not just to react against what we see with young people, but in particular, they need dialogue. They need real relationships where we're not judging them, but embracing them and leading them along the path to lead a life of wholeness in Jesus Christ.
Wonderful. Great job. That was phenomenal. Thank you. This is great.
Yeah. Good stuff.
That's perfect, Reverend Banks. So just to give you a snapshot of where we're going, from here. We have a number of other interviews. We were in New York and New Jersey already. This afternoon, be interviewing Reverend Tony Lee.
Yeah, that's my buddy down the street.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Community
Okay.
folk. Yeah.
And then we're going to Nashville, South Carolina, and probably Atlanta as well, and getting a few different voices. And then we'll be putting this together into about 8 to 10 minute video that is on the Black church and teen pregnancy, what the challenges are, and encouraging pastors to engage on these issues. And that will be on the National Campaign's website,
Great.
along with resources that pastors can use if they desire to engage. And the hope is really, there's no silver bullet here. It's just start the conversation. Start the conversation with young people, both teens and young adults. Because as you said, interestingly enough, a lot of people didn't get pregnant as teens, but when they were in their early 20s.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
we delayed the teen pregnancy, but I mean, I have two mothers. They have 4 children each. You know, so I mean,
Wow.
you know,
And part of it is, and it's a really nuanced conversation because it's one,